everyone, we're going to continue this adventure we're on making a ball jointed doll based on the Shido method. And I have finished up the legs pretty much. Did a little bit more carving, but they're about as close as I can get them to being symmetrical. I mean, I'm sure I'll do a little bit more with them, but you know, I was happy that if I look at the way the top ended up, it looks like they're pretty much the same, which is pretty amazing. So that's good. So we're going to put those aside for now. And we're going to work on some more body parts. Now, in my last video on the legs, I said we would work on the arms, but according to the book, you actually connect the arm to the body, and then you cut the arm off, and this is to make sure that it fits together properly and looks, you know, seamless with the ball joint in between. So that means I really need to work on the body first, because I don't want to attach the arm to the form that I have, because that's not how the body's going to end up looking. I'm going to have to add some stuff and take away some stuff to make it look a little more realistic. So, you know, right now we have basically this very basic form. So we've got to put, you know, carved buttocks on, and the front, and more boob things. Got to make these a little more defined. And, you know, I think the shoulder area is probably going to change. So, you know, I don't want to attach this arm now, but I think, you know, attaching the arm later will be much better if the body is right. So based on that, we're going to go ahead and work on the torso, and that's going to be probably the most detailed thing that we do with this doll, because there's just so much. I mean, the look of the breast, the rib cage, the navel, the front pubic area, the buttocks. Yeah, it's gonna be a challenge, but we'll do it. We're gonna do it. Yay! All right, so get ready. We're gonna start working on this torso and see if we can turn it into something that looks like a female doll. So before we get started, let's look at the book again. I just want to show you how the artist here sort of drew on the body to kind of keep things straight, and I think that's important because you got to keep things lined up. But we're going to be doing a little bit of that as well. But if you don't get things lined up, this doll is never going to move and work the way it's supposed to. And I'm always looking at this doll too. It's not the same type of doll, but I mean, I don't have a real female nude model, so it's helpful to have that doll to look at, because that one does work well. And we have this really sort of blocky looking torso here that we've got to make look like a female. And the first thing I've noticed is I think, you know, the curve of the back is not pronounced enough. If you look at this doll, it's pretty pronounced, and my doll is almost straight, mine. But I mean, we knew this. We knew we were going to have to do some work. So we got a good base. We're happy with that. So we're just going to start carving. And I'm going to just use the X-Acto in the places where I need to take off a lot of clay. If it's just a small area, maybe just use sander. But using the X-Acto can help you get off a lot of the clay. And then you can go back over and sand it to make it smooth. But basically from now on, I'm just sort of looking at the doll, looking at the shape, turning it back and forth in my hands, seeing, you know, the symmetry of it, seeing how it's coming along. You just have to do that as you work, and don't take off, you know, too much in any one area, because you have to remember there's not that much clay here. There's only you know, a small amount of clay, so you can't take off too much. We can always add to it, you know, that's not a problem, and we will be doing that to some of the areas here. At this point, I wanted to make some notations. First of all, I want to make a mark down the front and back in the center of the doll to keep things lined up, because if you have the line in the back going down and it doesn't match up with where the buttocks crack is, it's not going to work. Same in the front. You've got to have all that lined up. So I'm just making a few marks, and then we can go back and add some clay. Like we're going to have to add some to build up the buttocks a little bit. Remember to always spray the clay with water to the areas that you're going to be adding clay to, so that the new clay will stick to it properly. Otherwise, it'll just flake off. It'll separate. One thing to keep in mind too is when you're putting 2 pieces of clay on the doll, in that, like this, two buttocks, try to make sure that you use the same amount of clay. It will just save you a lot of time from having to make one side look like the other. I know that sounds like a simple thing, but it really does take a lot of time. There's a lot of sanding and carving going on here. But I'm basically using my fingers and my metal tool. The metal tool end is really great for smoothing the clay, even better than fingers in some cases. And the other end has a sharp point, which is great. You can use that. The other thing I wanted to mention is before you start putting the clay down, if it's going to be a thick amount of clay, you can leave the ink mark, but if it's going to be thin, it could show through it when you start to sand it and it gets thinner. So just keep that in mind, because you don't want to have that show. You can always sand off the ink mark or just wipe it off with a wet paper towel. So right now I'm just building up the butt a little bit, because I didn't think it was pronounced enough or big enough, and it makes it possible for you to have a little bit more contour. So just adding that, and then we'll be adding some clay to the front as well, because the body is so flat. We need to add some contours to it, because bodies aren't flat, they're curvy, especially female bodies. So again, I'm going to be adding some clay down at the bottom here for the mons pubis to have that be sort of pronounced. And then once I get that positioned, I'll also add a little bit to the tummy area, because I think people, have a little bit of a tummy pooch out, even if they're very thin. And this doll's not going to be like super thin. Let's just face it. She's not. So the other part is we're going to have to put some on the breast, because they weren't quite big enough. Also, I noticed when I was looking at the book versus my doll, my breasts are so close together, and the breasts on the doll and the book are pretty far apart. So as I'm adding this additional clay, I'm just sort of molding it so that I'm pushing it a little bit apart and making it look a little bit more natural. So that was another thing I wanted to work on. I wasn't really satisfied with the way that would look. But as you can see, we're starting to get some curves and natural look on the doll, and we're going to have to let this clay dry. I let it dry overnight, because you just don't want to start sanding and then have it just pull off. So I'll let it dry overnight, and then you can come back and start doing some fine tuning, whether it's carving or sanding, depending on what you need to take off. I'm carving out the little belly button there a little bit, and that way I can get rid of the rest of those ink marks. Also, I'm carving up above where the thigh will join, that there's sort of a curve there that I needed to carve out, and then it sort of comes down into a point in the front where the mons pubis is, and just sanding, making some progress with this. It's a lot of sanding. If you need to take off a lot, just use your X-Acto, but in general, I just love these sanding blocks. They're nail sanding blocks. They're not for wood or clay or anything special. I just get them on Amazon. So at one point I wanted to look at the legs, because the legs are going to have to fit with this body, and I just wanted to see how that looked, if that was going to work out. And I sort of am starting to realize a couple things here. But first off, I needed to pull out some of this styrofoam so that I could get a better view of how the clay will look and how it will attach to the leg. So I basically just decided that I needed to go ahead and pull out all the styrofoam too. But I did want to make those arcs over the thigh, where the thigh will join, a little bit deeper and make it look a little bit, I think it'll be more realistic looking too. So I'm just carving those sections out, sort of a half, just a little bit of an arc there, and also making sure that it meets up with the back. So if you need to, you can always, adjust things, because I think, it wasn't looking exactly like the front and the back were on the same level. So you can either do that with the sandpaper or with the X-Acto. Either way, doesn't matter, as long as you know what you're doing. So here I'm going to try to make the ridge down the middle of the back where the spine would be. And I'm just using the sharp end of my metal tool. And be careful, because before you get the ridge started, that where you have a groove to have the tool work through, you can really slide off and make a big scratch over your doll. So just be careful, make that a gradual thing. Then I'm also carving out where the shoulder blades will be, making a little indentation carve here, and we'll sand this out later so it's smoother, but sometimes you have to just make some sort of dramatic looking cuts and then go back and make it look more natural. That's just the nature of clay. But I struggled a little bit with deciding how realistic to make this doll, because the more realistic, the more work, obviously. And also, I have to keep in mind, this is the first time I've ever made this type of doll. It's a lot of just trying to learn the technology of how this is all going to work together too. So I didn't really want to spend so much time trying to make it realistic that I don't have time to deal with the engineering of it. But I do want it to look somewhat realistic, so I'm adding a few of the details that are in the book. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. So I figured I needed to lower the mons pubis a little bit, because it was still up too high on the abdomen, and I wanted it to come right down into a peak there in the front between where the arcs are that are going to go over the thighs. So just added a strip of clay underneath the sort of bulging area that I'd already put down, and then I'm just putting a little circle there on the abdomen to make the protrusion of the abdomen right above the mons pubis. Mons pubis is the anatomical term. Sorry. Hopefully you know what that meant. Pubic area. But make sure that you blend the clay all the way down. Don't leave it so that it looks like there's two pieces joined together, because that will cause a crack. And it'll just flake off then. So we're starting to look a little bit better, a little bit more realistic, I think. We are getting a little bit of detail. Now I noticed that the shoulders are too slopey at this point, and we're going to be putting the arms on, so I decided I needed to add some clay there. Also, I realized I'm going to have to put a strip of clay from the front to the back of the doll for the legs to fit in. And it also made me realize that now was the time to take out that styrofoam, because once I put a strip of clay across there, it's going to be much harder to get to it. So I started with the shoulders, and I just put a little strip of clay across there. Again, make sure you wet the dry clay first before you put it down, and then make sure that you spread the clay out on the edges so that it's smoothed out and not leaving a gap. You can use your fingers or a tool, whichever works better for you, but I kind of use a little bit of both. When I need to really smooth it, I use that tool, and maybe use my fingers for the initial molding and forming. So the arms are going to go there, so I sort of leave that area flat, but I needed to raise the shoulders up a little bit. They were just too slopey looking, and I didn't think it was going to look right once we put the arms on. And better to do it now than to wait, because every time you add clay, you got to let it dry overnight. So that's why it takes so long. So that's looking a lot better. So now it's time to work on that strip between the legs, and that's where we want to pull out all the styrofoam. Also, I'm noticing that it's not going to look like round holes where the legs will be. We'll have to work on that, but that's the next step. First, let's get rid of the styrofoam. We can pull all this out now. I like the styrofoam in there while I'm carving and sanding because it just provides extra support. I mean, this is pretty strong clay, but still, if you squished it hard enough, it probably would crack. So keep it in as long as you can. At the point that you can't see a way to get it out anymore, you're going to have to go ahead and take it out though. So I'm just using my X-Acto to cut and scrape, and then we ended up with this empty shell of a body, and that looks good. So now we're going to put that strip of clay there. So we're just going to get a piece of clay out. We're going to put water, spray water inside the doll's body. But before that, I just want to kind of get an idea of how this is all going to fit together. So I take my legs that I've shaped and looking at them, but the legs themselves won't be attached to the body. It will be a ball. It'll be the ball joint. So I had already made some balls by taking a small styrofoam ball and covering them with clay. So I have those here in some different sizes, and we can look at that. But first I needed to get rid of the lip that is overhanging on the opening here because of it was hanging over the styrofoam. So I want to get it smoothed out so I have an idea of exactly what room I have in there. So just taking a strip of clay, like I said, you want to wet the inside, front and back, where you're going to be placing the strip so that the clay can stick to it properly. And you want to make sure you get enough up on the body inside so that it has some support. And make sure you get it straight. The first time I did this, I didn't get it straight. I had to take it out. I'll just tell you. So make sure you have enough that you can press it up against the back of the front and the back of the back. That'll give it the support that it needs when you start carving it. And then just use your tool to press it down really good. Make sure you get it nice and pressed down. Yeah, now again, we're going to have to let this dry overnight so that we can carve it. So we've left it overnight. Here's the next day. And as you can see, that is not a round hole. That is so not a round hole. And we're going to have a round hole eventually for the ball to go into. So we're going to have to do a little bit of repair work here. And what we have to do is we can't really change the sides that much. We can carve some off of the strip that we put between the legs. And it's a good idea to mark that just so you don't carve too much on one side or the other. So just take your pen and carve out, but draw out where you want to carve. So we can make that opening a little bit rounder by doing that, but still it's just too oblong. So just take your X-Acto and carve out that amount, carve out the marks area, and then what we'll have to do is add some clay underneath the doll in the front and the back, and then we'll have to take off from the outside, make her thinner front and back, and then we'll be able to make the holes more round. So this is the ball that I have, and if you look at the leg, let's see how that fits first, because if that works, then we'll use that size ball because the legs look pretty good. But let's take out the top part of the styrofoam here so we can sit the ball down in it and see how it fits. Now we're going to be cutting the leg apart at the knee to put in a ball joint there, so we'll be able to remove the rest of the styrofoam that way, but it was good to get out a little bit of it from the top part where it's nice and wide. All right, so that really looks pretty good. That actually looks like that's going to fit pretty well. So if we're going to use that size ball, then we need to make the hole in the body fit that ball. And you can see there's a gap up at the top and at the back. So we have to fill in clay in those two areas, and then we'll have to cut off from the outside to make it fit, to make it match. So just get some globs of clay and spray, your water where you're going to put it. And then we're just going to put clay inside the top and the bottom. And again, we'll have to let it dry overnight, but then we can come back and make some adjustments to the outside of the body so that we can make sure that these holes are round. The body's a little too thick is what happened. My bad. But like I said, this is my first time, so oh well. Yeah, just keep looking at your ball versus the hole, and that tells you how much clay you've got to add. So you can always take away, you can always carve out, but you want to go ahead and get it so that it looks nice and round. Always easier to take off than add. So at this point, I'm having to add more down at the bottom. Just continuing to add little pieces until I get it the thickness that I need to be able to make a round hole. So I hope I'm explaining this well, but basically you're just having to add to the inside and then take away from the outside. That's just the simplest way to think about it. And fortunately, I think that it's going to end up looking okay. The bad thing would be if you did that and it didn't look okay. So you can see here the holes look pretty round now, but you've got a lot of thickness in the front and back, so we're going to have to carve off some of that to make it look right, to go with the newly reduced opening of the round holes. So we're going to use the X-Acto because you're doing lots of carving. You're carving off substantial amounts. So just use your X-Acto, get it to where you think it needs to be, and then you can start sanding and shaping. Same thing on the front. That's going to have to be shaped. You may have to do a little bit adjustment with that bulge of the tummy, but I didn't make that large anyway, so it's not so bad. Keep looking at your ball and seeing if you think it will fit too, because you want to make sure you're getting this the right size. But honestly, I think after I carve this amount off, it's actually going to look a lot better. It's going to look thinner, which I think it was a little too thick for this sort of doll. So just sand away, get it down to where you need it, and starting to look better now. We've sanded a lot of the area. We've got our round holes. They look pretty good. They look like the ball will eventually fit there. We'll have to do some more fine-tuned sanding, but yeah, I think it's gonna work. Yay! Oh, you'll notice I added nipples too, by the way. I think I did that off camera. Sorry. Just put a little ball of clay on top of the breast and make your nipple. Now, in the next video, we're going to be attaching the arms to this torso, and we can, pull out that skewer that we had in it to give it some strength. But we'll be shaping the arm, and that'll be easy because there's really just not that much to do to shape an arm. Basically a tube, and you just make some indentions. But what we'll have to do is put a cap on the top of the shoulder, and I already actually did one of the arms that way so I can show you. You have to keep the hole open, and then we'll be attaching it to the body with clay, and then we'll saw it right back off, but you have to have a nice flat surface. But right now we're going to be adding collarbones to the doll and some contouring on the neck. So if you look at this doll, you see it's got the collarbones and then that groove down the front of the neck. So that's what we're going to add just to give it a little bit more realistic look. But the next video will show the attachment of the arms. You just have to have that clean cut to be able to put the ball in the joint. You can't do that freehand. So just get some blobs of clay and put it up there where the collarbones will be. You're going to be sanding this, so what you have initially will be a little bit exaggerated. But that's okay. You know, you can always carve it off or sand it off. You just want to make sure you get the edges smoothed out with the dry clay so that you don't have any cracks. Otherwise it'll just fall apart. So once we have that, we'll have to let it dry again, and then showing you here how to do the thing with the neck. You're just going to get a blob of clay, put it right there at the base of the neck, you know, wet the dry clay, put that blob there, and then just use your tool to make the groove down the center. Smooth out the edges on the sides, and then just take your tool and make that groove down the middle. That tool is so handy. You got to have that if you're working with clay. Polymer clay or air dry clay, you got to have it. And we'll sand that down too. It looks a little bit absurd right now, but that's okay. That's kind of the secret with working with clay. You start out with it being too exaggerated, and then you can work it down. If you ever get clay on your tool and it dries and it's hard to get off, honestly, you can just use one of your sanding blocks and run your tool over it, and then it'll pull it right off. Now I'm just taking some smaller pieces of clay and putting them under the breast. This is going to be to show sort of a rib cage effect. So you're just going to use 2 pieces of clay on either side, leaving a gap in between. And we will come back and be sanding that quite a bit, but just make sure you kind of use the same amount so you don't have a lot of work to make them look similar. I think this is about the most I'm going to want to do with this torso. I mean, I don't want to get into so much reality that I'll probably end up ruining it, is what would happen. But I think if we have, you know, the rib cage look, the collarbones, you know, and the way we did the abdomen and the buttocks and the back and the shoulder blades, I think that's plenty, honestly. I think it'll look decent. It's probably more than a lot of ball jointed dolls have. It's only these really artistic ones that get into the really enormous amount of detail. But so we got the groove down the back, we got the collarbone, everything. So just let that dry overnight and come back the next day and we can do a whole lot of sanding. So basically you just want to smooth off everything, make sure all the edges are smoothed out where you joined the clay to the new clay to the old clay, and make sure things look symmetrical and that it's not too exaggerated, especially that neck part. We really had to sand down that just a little bit more, and even I cut it even with the knife a little bit because it was a little bit too protruding. You want to make sure that the places where you're going to attach the arms look the same on both sides. I've got that flattened area, that's where we'll be putting the arm, and individually we're going to have to open that hole up because there will be strings running through there for the arms, so keep that in mind. Lots to keep in mind. But I'm a little bit more hopeful now with this way this is coming together. She's definitely looking more like a doll now, and the body's looking like it's going to fit with the legs and the arms, so that's all very hopeful. Just spend 3 or 4 hours sanding. That's what you do. I think I cut this down from 3 hours, all of this. It's a good thing we can have that fast forward feature. So yeah, we've got her looking pretty good now. I think at this point we'll be able to end the video and start looking forward to the next one where we'll be putting the arms on. And that'll be a whole nother adventure. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some new techniques and learned some things not to do and some things you can do. But overall, pretty pleased with how this is going at this point. My fear is lessened a little bit because I thought initially it was not going to work. But I like the way she looks. And I think we got, the holes now nice and round. So I think that they'll work with the balls. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll subscribe, and that helps me out a lot. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.